our session, our group, which is 1C, and then we will devote the remaining 30 minutes for questions and answers from the distinguished delegates who are attending this session. As a backgrounder, climate change has been one of the key drivers of forced migration in our region, the West African region. Although West Africa's contribution to global climate change is very minimal, our geographical location and weak adaptive capacity makes us vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Adverse temperature and fluctuating rainfall patterns are noticeable changes that have affected the livelihoods of people within West Africa, majority of whom depend on rainfall for agriculture purposes. Climate change-induced flooding in parts of West Africa is also a driver for seasonal and permanent migration. While migration occurs in response to climate change, it is not adequately incorporated into planned climate change adaptation strategies being implemented by countries within the West African region. It is in this regard that ECOWAS as an institution is partnering with its 3 centers of excellence, the National Defense College Nigeria, the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center in Ghana, where you are at the moment, and École du Maintien de la Paix à Lyon-Blondin Bay in Bamako, Mali, to undertake a research on demography and its impact on peace and security within our region. This research commenced last year, and hopefully we will be having a validation workshop on the outcome of the research sometime in 2024. With these few words, I'd like to invite our distinguished panelists to please give their initial remarks regarding the topic for discussion. So I will start to be gender sensitive. I will call on Dr. Naila Salihu to give her initial remarks. Dr. Naila Salihu, please.
In the tone and the context for our discussion this afternoon. As he rightly pointed out, KIPTC, NDC, and EMP were tasked to carry out some research on the impact of demographic changes on peace and security in West Africa. So KIPTC, I would like to share some insights on what we found from the countries that we focused on. So we studied Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea-Bissau. So with regards to our initial findings, it was observed that there had been significant growth in the populations of most West African countries, and with a specific course of where we visited. And over the 10 to 15-year period that we were looking at in terms of the statistical figures, we realized that these countries have recorded significant increase in their population numbers. And it's also very interesting that currently the population dynamic is very youthful. A lot of these countries have about 50 to 60% of their population falling into the youth bracket of between 15 to 35 years of age. And even other countries like Liberia had slightly higher figures of about 74% than the others. So we found that the youthfulness of the population dynamics in the region presents both opportunities and challenges, though we always tend to look at the look at it from the threat angle, because a youthful population obviously is an asset to any country, provided we have the rightful mechanisms and also the frameworks to harness the potentials that the youth present in terms of being the backbone of the economy and also driving the social change processes in those countries. So we realize that as population increases in the region, it has also come with high mobility rates. Presently, West Africa has one of the highest rates of migration when you look at it from both internal and also external migration. Also, this has also come with a lot of urbanization in most countries. And for typically post-conflict countries like Sierra Leone, you realize that the trend in the urbanization situation has been very chaotic because of ineffective urban planning processes that should have been considered in trying to guide the processes, because people are moving for diverse reasons, some being economic, others just to get a better access to education, and also for political reasons, as well. Countries that are experiencing conflict are also forcing people to move out. So, for instance, conflicts in Mali and Burkina Faso has resulted in a lot of population movement into countries like Ghana and Burkina Faso. And all these are exerting enormous pressures on limited social infrastructures that exist in these countries. So we're also interested in trying to understand how the demographic changes is also impacting on the environment. So here, one of the areas that we were looking at was the effects of climate change and how it also contributes to insecurity in the region. So generally, as Danjuma rightly stated in the introduction, most of our economies in the region are agri-based. So the effects of climate change on our people's livelihood and incomes is very much felt in the region. Though people's perception about these effects tend to vary because of maybe low levels of awareness about the effects of climate change in the region. So migration has also become one of the coping mechanisms that young people especially are using to cope with the effects of climate change. For instance, in Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, it was noted that, and this is also maybe particularly applicable in the Ghanaian case, where reduction in rainfall patterns is also affecting crop production, especially production of cash crops like cocoa and the rest, which are the backbone of a lot of the economies of these countries. So now people are also trying to find other adaptation measures, even trying to move away from to diversify the kind of crops that they plant in order to cope with the effects of climate change. So now a lot of farmers in Côte d'Ivoire are now even replacing cocoa production and other cash crops with rubber plantation, because that is seen to be a very somehow resistant to the effects of hard effects of or lack of adequate rainfall. And also we realize that in countries like Guinea-Bissau, also rising temperatures is also affecting the people's lives, because a lot of these areas also depend on a lot of aqua resources for livelihoods. And in countries like Ghana, for instance, and I think it's also applicable to a lot of the countries, because, for instance, maize is a very common staple in a lot of our food, and because of the effects of climate change, farmers in this of youthful generation who do not really have adequate economic opportunities. So this has become a very attractive area where lots of youth are traveling across the countries to just engage in the lucrative illegal mining business. But this also it's a very worrying development because of the effects that it has on the environment, and as we have seen in the cases of destruction of water bodies and farmlands in places like Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, just to mention in a few. And in places like Ghana, even farmers are now being forced or being compelled to give up their farmlands for lucrative, if I can use the word, galamsey businesses in Ashanti and Eastern regions, especially. So, but it also has a potential security threat because it is believed that mining is very attractive to extremist groups because they need money to also fund their activities. And there are research that tend to support or provide evidence about the likelihood involvement of extremist groups in illegal mining especially in the Sahel region, especially. So this continue to undermine human security and also the security of states in the region. So I'll pause here and come back with some of the specific findings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naila. At this moment, I almost committed harakiri because I did not recognize the participation of our rapporteurs, Ms. Linda Tamaklo and also Ms. Michelle Dako, and also our syndicate coordinators, Dr. Victor Joke, who is a lecturer at the KIPTC, and Colonel Emmanuel Gayadu, who is a course director at the KIPTC. You are recognized, and also we expect that you will play your respective roles. I will invite at this moment Professor F.M. Obi, who is the Director of Research at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, to also give his thoughts about the topic we're discussing today. Prof, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all thank the organizers of this program and all the organizations and countries that are part of this. I think this is coming at the right time, and it's something that we can joke with, because the future of Africa really matters here now with regards to the environment, climate, and other issues, that are part of these existential threats. I think one thing that we must take into consideration right now is the fact that today the land is turning against us in Africa. The land is turning against us, and that is why this has become very necessary. The adverse effect of climate change, and I think my country is one that is also affected in the northern part of Nigeria, bordering the Sahel. This is one area that has really been impacted negatively by climate change. Some few years ago, I went into a study titled, I was looking at climate change and environmental refugees. Anyway, we were trying to see a link between environmental refugee with climate change, or what we're also looking at was the fact that we wanted to see if climate change is also reproducing refugees the same way crises are doing. 3 years ago, some scholars came from France, the same thing, trying to see the nexus between this. As a matter of fact, it is hard to establish. But one thing we also have to understand and realize is that, within the Sahel, so all the countries bordering the Sahel in West Africa, this has become a problem, a threat. At the last global summit that was held, the G20, the G7 summit, the BRICS summit, the United Nations Trade Forum, these issues were all raised. And so we shouldn't take it lightly. I would also like to say, whether we agree or not, climate change is part of humanity, and its occurrences will affect our existence, either positively or negatively. My colleague talked about the youth bulge, and everybody talks about the fact that youth they have prospects for every nation. But I think what we are not also taking into consideration is the credibility of that youth. I think that should be taken into consideration, because if you look at most migrants, across the borders, most of them are really not educated. 5 years ago, I did a study for IOM, and I found out that most of the people who actually migrate irregularly are not schooled. And this is why it's posing a great problem, for many of our countries. So, but it's important. What is important is the conclusion we can draw from climate change, the impact of climate change, whether positively or negatively. But what remains sacrosanct is the fact that humans must learn to be resilient, adapt, and innovate. Personal experience, I went to do a study somewhere in a country, and they took me to the desert. For the first time, I saw how the desert encroachment was stopped. And this is what Africa, West Africa, must also learn. I saw how some part of the desert was rejuvenated. Trees started growing. Now, an aspect of that desert also was used as a recreation park. The same way we use our oceans and seas for recreation park, And so this is what we have to begin to learn too in Africa. We don't always have to wait for donors. Our leaders should also be innovative, and that is the whole essence. Conditions, very stringent conditions actually create innovations, and this is the time that we begin to look at those kind of innovations that we have to. But many questions looms. First, how do we manage migration in the face of national and regional insecurity? Now, the second thing, as an ECOWAS member state, being cognizant of the protocol of free movement and of persons and goods in ECOWAS integration process, what do we manage? Persons, goods, or services? This underpins the fact that in some cases, goods that crisscross our borders have a measure of being lethal and capable of posing insecurity. A good example, the borders between the Sahelian countries. We had a conference sometimes when looking at border, the problems, mitigating border challenges and all that. We found out that in the mornings, they carry their heads, the cows, to cross over the borders. They pack them with guns. They cross, they discharge the guns. Then when they are coming back, they load them with food, and they go back. And so this is the kind of things we keep seeing across our borders. And it has really become a worrisome challenge that even the government right now cannot face them alone. And that is why the whole issue of concerted effort is very, very necessary. You see, one of the things that we cannot, as a unit, as a country, mitigate is climate change, terrorism. And so I think it's a global problem that we all have to come together and see and look for solutions to this problem. The solid state of migration in West Africa, I would like to say that in the 21st century, migration ordinarily should be an asset for every country and region of the world, but in the Sahel, because of the uncoordinated nature of migration owing to natural or environmental disasters and conflict, migration has gradually become a nightmare for individual groups and the various countries themselves. As a matter of fact, there's a whole lot of farmer header crisis in West Africa. There's also crisis. The banditry we are facing, especially in Nigeria, these are not, most of them are not actually Nigerians, they are immigrants who come in. And the whole of the north, even when I was growing up as a kid, they take their heads across a road. In those days, it was calmer. It was okay. They just come, they feed, and they go back during the rainy seasons. But this time, they destroy farms. They destroy everything. It now creates more problems for our countries. I think this is something, too, we should also look at. But the risks thereof, climate change and desertification, nevertheless, may create environmental refugees searching for pastures and economic well-being, who in themselves are illegal or irregular migrants and are fueling and worsening the region's security threat. A major risk factor, which I'll talk about is, in this discussion, is Africa's leadership and governance. That's a major risk factor. This is to suggest that the opportunities and risks associated with climate change are pivoted on the government of West African states. Our governments are the ones at the helm of affairs. They are the ones who can help to mitigate these challenges, and they are also the ones, if they don't do anything, that will give boost to the problems and challenges from climate change. Most of our leaders are, in quotes, egregious leaders who keep a blind eye to astute leadership and good governance. The more the state remains nonchalant, the more West Africa drifts into self-destruction and politicized. So it is better we all sit up and do the right thing. I would like to say that navigating climate change, with regards to the opportunities therein, she's talked about most of the opportunities. Climate change could serve as a source of social change, innovation, development, and prosperity. This I got from the concept note that was sent, by the organizers of this conference. Now, the statement above, as it is put there, portrays that irrespective of the odds resulting from climate change and migration, both have the propensity to be a source of economic growth and development, depending on how we manage both. Now, one thing I have not seen in Africa, and which I've seen in other climes, is relocating people affected by climate change. I think this is something we should also begin to do. Instead of you saying, I heard a lot of discussion, a lot of migrants from these countries are here, but even within the country, we can relocate people. I've seen countries do that. You relocate people who are affected by climate change. For instance, those who are affected by the encroachment of the desert. Why can't we do that? Create a space, build houses for them, as I'm rounding up, and put them. The next thing we can do is innovations. Come up with smart agricultural practices, which she has also talked about, greenhouses. Right now, greenhouses are feeding a lot of countries. We need to innovate. We need to create better ways to provide food security. Now, we should also learn to stop desert encroachment, and by doing the needful, plant trees, create buffers. The aspect of the desert could become recreation parks, which I've talked about. Now, recommendation for me would be ECOWAS should re-examine its protocol and convention to handle adverse climate change issues in a more innovative manner, away from the old ways. Secondly, I would recommend that we should stop looking for donor aid that prefers ad hoc solutions to climate change, instigated migrations and refugees. I will also say government of West African countries should learn to relocate populations displaced by climate change. And finally, we must learn to prefer scientific solutions to climate-induced challenges. This will go a long way by inhibiting migration and refugees. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for a very insightful talk about climate change. You've made raised a number of issues regarding climate change. It affects us negatively or positively, depending on how we look at it. And also, you've told us that our deserts that are within the region could be rejuvenated, and then we need to learn on how to proceed on this. You also say that our protocol of free movement, that's the ECOWAS protocol of free movement, needs to be re-examined because it's part of what is causing insecurity within the region. And you have also proffered some very useful recommendations using smart agricultural practices, technological innovations, and also we need to stop desert encroachment. Thank you very much, Prof, for your thoughts. I want at this moment to invite Colonel Dr. Taher Maiga to give his thoughts on the topic. Dr. Maiga, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir, Danjuma. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. Also, je préfère m'exprimer en français. Je pense que c'est plus simple. It's more easy. Alors, ce thème que nous allons aborder, que je vais aborder avec vous aujourd'hui, ça reflète les conclusions d'une étude commanditée par la CEDEAO. Et cette étude a été menée par l'école de maintien de la paix à Lieu-Blanc-Bay dans 6 pays de la CEDEAO, à savoir le Mali, le Burkina, la Guinée, le Sénégal, le Cap-Vert et la Gambie. Alors, nous allons l'aborder parce que c'est à la lumière de l'explosion démographique qui se passe, ou la poussée démographique qui se passe dans ces 6 pays-là. À la lumière de cette poussée démographique, nous allons faire la corrélation avec le changement climatique, n'est-ce pas? Et aussi voir qu'est-ce qu'on peut en tirer en termes d'obstacles, mais aussi d'opportunités pour ces différents pays-là. C'est un sujet complexe sur lequel nous allons attaquer sous 3 angles, notamment sur le plan social, le plan économique et le plan environnemental. Mon intervention se déroulera essentiellement en 3 points. Il y a les opportunités, les obstacles et des recommandations, donc pour être plus simple. En termes d'opportunités, ce qui est ressorti de ces études que nous avons, on a pris essentiellement 4 opportunités et 4 obstacles que je veux développer. Ce n'est pas exhaustif. La première opportunité, c'est l'adaptation aux changements climatiques et environnementaux.
To adapt behavior patterns to which would make them adapt to climate change. And then, for example, when there's a drought where the people in that population, either they're going to leave that land on which they are, or they would therefore would have to look for ways to be able to adapt. And that brings into question the issue of resilience. And so there's the need for them to do a certain number of things to be sure that they are appropriately adapted to the changes that are taking place on the ground in those countries. So there would be the need for us to be able to be involved, to have the appropriate know-how, to know how they can survive under the threat of climate change. That's the first opportunity. The second has to do with sources of possible diversification of sources of revenue coming out of climate change. And then, there are new hidden opportunities. The fact that you leave your country, you go to another geographical area. For example, people have left the Sahel. We know that due to artisanal mining and artisanal gold craft, there are many countries who are going to those countries to work in the mines because of the poor raining situation in their country, they are not able to work, and therefore it gives them, so the economic opportunities are created as an opportunity. Now let me talk about the third opportunity. These are migrants who leave to go and work in other countries, bring back money to their home countries, and that becomes a source of revenue in these countries. And these are amounts of money that these old people who cannot travel outside are able to take advantage of, and it's a lot of wealth for them. It helps to fund the education of young people who are in the lower ages, and so that's a great opportunity. Now let me talk about the last opportunity, which has to do with cultural diversity and exchange of knowledge. Certainly when you go to another country, you get a lot more exposure as a result of living in those countries and seeing different ways in which people do things. And so because of that, once they come back to the country, they come to share that with other people. And so we see people, and so we're going to learn different cultures and different ways of doing things from other countries, and we get the opportunity to share it with our people. These are great opportunities opportunities. And so these are opportunities we can look at, which we can be able to see how we can take advantage of climate change. Now let's move on to talk about the obstacles. And I'm going to give you 4 obstacles. First of all, there is forced displacement, and then unplanned displacement, which brings up certain conflicts, and then social instability. And then these are all things that come up as a result of the work that as a result of what the migrants do. And you know, of course, because of climate change, we have people who leave the country.
Mais les communautés qui viennent, les migrants qui viennent veulent aussi profiter de ça. Donc souvent, ça donne lieu à des tensions, à des conflits. Et ça, c'est un problème qu'on doit pouvoir gérer. Le deuxième obstacle, c'est l'exacerbation des vulnérabilités des populations pauvres, des zones totalement exposées au changement climatique. Souvent, les migrants, quand ils viennent, là où ils viennent, souvent, c'est des populations également qui sont pauvres. Parce que vous savez, la majorité des populations qui se déplacent, les migrants, n'ont pas la possibilité d'aller dans des pays très développés. Et souvent, le déplacement, il est interne du pays ou bien dans des frontières pas très loin. Parce que souvent, avec ces populations, nous partageons plus ou moins les mêmes cultures. Mais seulement que souvent, c'est des populations aussi qui n'ont pas assez de moyens. Donc, cela pose problème. Il y a également l'accroissement des pressions sur les ressources naturelles. Ça aussi, ça peut entraîner des conflits. Par exemple, les points d'eau, quand une population se déplace pour aller vers un village, mais les ressources, par exemple, comme l'eau, c'est très limité. On a un cours d'eau. Souvent, le partage de ce cours d'eau entre éleveurs ou agriculteurs peut poser problème. Ou des puits. Quand vous prenez, par exemple, le Sahel, ou le nord du Mali, ou un peu celui du Burkina, vous allez trouver souvent c'est un puits pour tout un village, ou 2 ou 3 villages qui utilisent le même puits. Alors, le puits souvent peut s'achécer. Et il faut attendre des heures pour que l'eau ne remonte, pour pouvoir puiser de l'eau. Donc souvent, c'est même insuffisant pour la communauté qui est là. Donc dès que des migrants viennent s'ajouter à ça, ça va poser des problèmes. Et le dernier obstacle, dont on peut en parler, il s'agit du défi de la gouvernance en matière de gestion des flux migratoires. C'est un problème aujourd'hui pour les gouvernements locaux par rapport à la gestion des migrants. C'est une jeunesse, souvent qui est très mobile, qui se déplace, mais aussi souvent des personnes âgées qui ne sont peut-être pas en bonne santé. Mais comment gérer tout ce flux entre ceux qui étaient là, qui n'ont pas les moyens, et ceux qui arrivent? Mais comment aussi il faut faire pour les protéger contre le banditisme, contre la criminalité, et aussi pour ne pas tomber dans les réseaux mafieux du terrorisme, pour être exploités. Donc ça pose un réel problème de gouvernance à ce niveau-là. Et aussi, comment est-ce qu'il faut juguler la corruption locale qui peut exister par rapport à ces migrants? Parce que souvent, vous allez voir des organisations internationales qui vont vouloir les assister en apportant des dons, et ainsi de suite. Mais autour de ça peut se développer une certaine mafia en termes de corruption par rapport à la distribution des dons, et ainsi de suite. Donc voilà un peu ce qu'on peut dire comme obstacle. Maintenant, en parlant de perspectives futures et de recommandations, la première pour nous serait d'identifier les tendances émergentes et les scénarios du futur possible. Aujourd'hui, nous avons une technologie très avancée qui permet de faire des simulations sur plusieurs années en termes de changement climatique. À savoir, dans 10 ans, quelles sont les sécheresses qui peuvent venir, les inondations, les ouragans qui peuvent se passer, et essayer de trouver des mécanismes, n'est-ce pas, à développer une résilience, à développer au niveau des communautés locales pour prévoir ces différents événements. Mais cela suppose d'abord des investissements massifs, n'est-ce pas, du gouvernement, des gouvernements locaux dans ces différents secteurs-là. Le deuxième point, c'est renforcer la résilience des populations et des systèmes face au changement climatique et à la migration. On a un cas école qui se trouve au Burkina Faso, le travail de Sawadogo qu'on a connu. Comment est-ce qu'il faut faire régénérer les forêts? Voilà des systèmes sur lesquels on peut travailler au niveau des communautés locales pour essayer de ralentir au moins sur le changement climatique. Le changement climatique est indéniable, ça va se passer, mais qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour le ralentir? Donc il faut développer ces méthodes de résilience au niveau des populations locales. Et le dernier point, il s'agit d'améliorer les dispositifs de gestion des risques et des catastrophes. Les mécanismes qui sont en place. Aujourd'hui, la CEDEAO a très avancé par rapport au système d'alerte précoce qui peut se retrouver. Ce même système, les systèmes d'alerte précoce qu'on utilise dans le cadre de la sécurité, peuvent être utilisés également dans tout ce qui est secteur de changement climatique pour prévenir. Voilà, je vais m'arrêter là et certainement dans la question, je vais aller répondre. Merci.
I think you've brought out some salient points. Key among them is the fact that our governments within the region do not adequately incorporate issues of forced migration into the planning of strategies by our countries. You have also given us 4 opportunities and also 4 obstacles regarding migration, climate change and migration within our region. And also you have provided us with a way forward. One is the use of advanced technology to predict droughts, and also for government to invest more in technology and build also the resilience of communities in terms of forest management. And last but not the least, you have also asked that we can have disaster management systems enhanced through early warning systems within the region. So thank you very much, Colonel Maiga. Last but not the least on our panel is Dr. Yao Adjeman Bafo. He is a senior research fellow at the Center for Climatic Change and Sustainability Studies at the College of Basic and Applied Sciences, University of Ghana. Dr. Bafo, please.
Thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be part of this very important discussion. I'm coming from the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana, where our focus is on knowledge generation. We run graduate programs, masters in climate change and sustainable development, and also PhD in climate change and sustainable development. And based on, the global acknowledgement, and then what I call so much scientific evidence, we all know that climate change is something that is happening. Again, because the evidence that we've gathered, at least since 1997, when the IPCC started reporting on climate change as a human problem, we've had enough data or enough evidence to show that what is happening is not a normal event of things. So much to the point that more recently we tend to refer to the ongoing change as a climate crisis. It's no more a climate change thing. And just to appreciate this, it is not a natural phenomenon. It is a human-induced phenomenon. So that's something that I think we should all acknowledge and then begin to think about. If it's a human-induced phenomenon, meaning that human beings are the ones who can then address this challenge that we have. And so for me, as someone who's been very much involved in this space for over 15 years now, I've been privileged to be part of several research projects or several engagement at different levels that explores or that aims to gain a better understanding of this phenomenon and how it's impacting different parts of our communities. So I would like to highlight a few things from my work across Ghana and a few ideas that I have based on my work in other African countries. So in Ghana, for instance, I remember in the year 2010, when I started my engagement on climate change research with colleagues from the US and Japan, we did a lot of work in northern Ghana. And our focus was on droughts and floods, which are, in the savanna regions or semi-arid regions, we all know that droughts are not abnormal. They're actually very normal events that happen all across the year. But the evidence from local knowledge or local people based on our work with them is the fact that the periods or the months in which drought occur have become longer. What that means automatically is that the ability to farm or to take resources from the land is also hampered. So one can say that climate change has become a wicked problem in addition to all the other problems that they are facing already. And so that gives us a sense of, if that is happening, is it entirely the fault of the people in those areas? Is that why they are experiencing extreme drought? Or maybe when it rains, and I think all of us from Ghana and even other parts of West African sub-region, we On an annual basis, we hear reports of extreme floods. It rains for just maybe 5 hours, but most communities get flooded. Those are clear evidence of the extremity or the abnormality of these weather events, which in the past were normal. So to be able to look at it from that sense, communities in very dry savanna regions of Ghana are experiencing extreme heat or extreme drought conditions, meaning that as an area that is dominantly rural and dependent on farming, agriculture, the ability to now continue farming or even harvest resources from the land is going to be hampered, because we know that, when you talk about plant phenology or even animal reproductivity, their ability to reproduce is based on the conditions that the climate offers them. So that entirely puts their livelihood or well-being at risk. So people's ability to access shelter, food, and water are all hampered. And I say this because for my own work up there in the north for about 10 years now, there's a lot of evidence to see that people are struggling. People are not able to access daily things. So what then happens? Like we've been talking about in several of my college conversations, they have to find alternatives. And I remember in the first presentation, she said that migration is an adaptation strategy, and people are relying on migration. So we can look at the fact that being able to live will require people to migrate. And we also know that migration comes with its own challenges. So that project, what we call the Climate Resilience in Semi-Arid Ghana, gave us important information on how to then think of alternatives to the existing livelihood systems for people. And that, I think, is very important. So I did another project in the forest region of Ghana. I want to start from the north and come down to the south. In the forest region of Ghana, cocoa growing areas within the country, where we all know the value of cocoa to our economy. And with climate change, with a lot of evidence that we are generating across the West African sub-region, more specifically, if you look at Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, there's a clear evidence that extreme heat is impacting on cocoa cultivation. And there's enough literature to support that. And people in Ghana, specifically in the cocoa growing communities that are worked in, including areas around, Ashanti region, indicate clearly that their cocoa is not yielding much. And so that is a challenge for them. And so they have to find alternatives. And I think we all know more recently the issues of galamsey and how people are now giving their land for mining, which then obviously impacts on cocoa cultivation and production. It's because, again, if the climatic regimes or if the temperature levels were good enough, people will not be worried about giving their land away. Rainfall irregularity is a common concern amongst farmers, not just cocoa farmers, but almost all farmers. So people would now prefer to engage in rubber plantation, where they will have to maybe pay limited attention to it. It's a real problem as well. So that is also coming down to, the middle belt and the forest zones of Ghana. If you move down to the coastal regions of Ghana, again, one will ask, how is climate change a concern? And I think that's one area that is what I would call experiencing real deep impact of climate change. I've had a chance to take my students on trips, field trips every year across the country. And one thing that we do every year is at least we go to some coastal communities. We go to Keta, we go to Shama, even right here in Accra, Glefed and Soman, if you look at all these areas. And you see the real evidence of what we call sea level rise or high tides. It's an annual problem. And we are seeing these things. Think about the fact that these coastal areas, of course, issues of urbanization and so much issues of deforestation have made these coastal areas easy prone to, sea level rise. But these are not just the people who live there who are creating these problems. These problems are being created by the bigger society. So the people in coastal areas, you just need to pay attention and go to Keta. In fact, if you feel like climate change is not a human-induced problem, you need to travel to these communities. I'll urge people to make time and travel to Keta. As I sit here, I get calls from people that I'm working with on a project called Coastal Community Resilience to Diarrhea. Because, on a regular basis, communities are flooding. And one of the challenges that coastal areas have is sanitation. Sanitation is a real challenge for them. So they end up having their homes flooded all the time. And when you talk about sanitation issues, you talk about, diarrhea and cholera-related issues. So people are really experiencing that. Every year, people have to relocate. That's another form of migration. And one interesting trend that I observe in the coastal area is that a lot of the people who are vulnerable to flooding in coastal Ghana are actually migrants, very interestingly. The fishermen who live along the coast of Ghana, they come from maybe Volta region, they go to the central region or the western region, and then they settle there very close to the coast because they fish. When they are looking for land, and I've had this encounter with several of them, to move further into the community, they struggle. There's a community called Annan Beach, in Shama area, where every year the communities get flooded. People try to move up. Now they are looking for land outside, let's say maybe 20 kilometers away, but they are struggling because they tell them you are not indigenous, so they struggle to have access to land. That is a real impact of climate change among these people. And even more, like people, those of us who are not directly on the coast, but we live in Accra or major cities, my ongoing research on extreme heat impact on our well-being also brings out very interesting findings. It tells clearly that anybody who works here or who goes to their homes are feeling a whole level of extreme heat or stress. Where in Europe, we call it heat wave. We don't have that yet in our country or in West Africa because we are already, exposed to a lot of, high levels of temperature. But in a few years to come, the projections tells us that we're going to have extreme temperatures which will affect people of different kinds, especially older people and also children. And even some of the evidence that we are gathering from our student research shows that people or pregnant women, antenatal, are going through a lot of stress, and childbirth issues are all related to extreme heat. So these are just a few examples that I'm trying to point out to you based on my research and based on ongoing work that I've been doing. One thing that I think I want to highlight in all this is the fact that the issues that I'm pointing out, I come from a background where I'm very much interested in nature. I think that to address these issues, we need to start thinking about taking care of nature. Nature, fundamentally, is the basis for our well-being. And so if you think about all the different challenges that we are facing, the issues of migration, if young men from the Bono area who originally are born into cocoa farming households decide to use the desert to go to Libya in the hope of reaching Europe, it's because their farmlands are not providing them with what they would get. Their fathers used to use it. So that's one example of how nature has been degraded. Galamsey is contributing to the degradation of nature all over the place. So people don't basically have anything to rely on. For now, those of us who are not directly in touch with nature, when I say in touch, working and relying on nature or the lands to give us food, we may not feel the impact. But mind you, in a few years' time, food security is a major concern. There will not be enough food being produced in those areas for us to have access to. So that's a real challenge as well. And that is a climate change challenge that I think we should be looking at. So I just want to conclude by saying that our interest in climate change and migration has to be connected to the land or the kind of nature resources that we have. Because the benefits that we get from nature, whether it's tangible or intangible, form the basis for our well-being. So if our well-being is to continue as a global society, then we need to pay attention more to taking care of nature. And at the time of my college proposed the idea of planting more trees, which is great. I mean, planting trees shouldn't be a problem, but we need to plant the right kind of trees wherever we find ourselves. In urban areas, the extreme heat that we're experiencing, we can plant more trees. But it's not just a matter of planting trees and that, so you need to take care of the trees. There's also the issue of policy. I think there has to be a conscious policy and also political will to address the issues. I feel like, personally, I know that our leaders have the knowledge, they have the ideas, but it's about implementation. They know exactly what to do. They are not people who sit there and have no idea, because around them, there are people who give them the information. But the political role is very important, and I understand that for us, training students or training people to understand the issues is one way that we are contributing, but it requires all of us to come on board to address the issues. So thank you very much.
Dr. Vapo. At this point, I'll come back to our distinguished delegates, excellencies. If there is any question that you would want any of the panelists to address, you might please indicate so that we give you the opportunity to ask the question, if there is anyone within the audience who wants to ask a question. But before then, I would want to I would want to be the first to ask the panelists. I've heard from one or two of them talking about smart agricultural practices. I think Dr. Bafo, you spoke about it, and I think also Professor Ubi, you spoke about smart agricultural practices. So my question to you both is, what climate smart agricultural practices must West African states adopt to mitigate the impact of climate change? What agricultural practices do you think our countries would need to adopt in order to cope with the impact of climate change? You can start with this one before the audience come with their questions. Thank you. I don't know which of you would go first. Prof, you want to go first?
All right, thank you. I will start. I believe that we are at a time when we know that climate smart means that, obviously, when we have extreme temperatures or we have rainfall, extreme rainfall, there are different kinds of whether plants or animals or livestock that we can be able to, withstand them. So climate smart agriculture practices are different in different what we call agroecological zones. But one of the key things that is centered on is around the reliance on more natural resources, much more than artificial, what I would call the resources. So for instance, there's a system of what we call tillage systems, whereby, when you farm your land, instead of using, let's say, a very huge tractor to totally roll the land, you do more manual, or you do, let's say, very simple tillage systems and not clear everything of the land. Because one thing about the soil or the land is that there are several microorganisms within the soil that helps to enrich it, or that works on the soil to enrich it very much. So the period in which you destroy it with a lot of tractor may not be the best. Another approach that we talk about is the use of what we call simple compost systems or manures from your environment. These are things that are not pesticides. These are things that are just nature. So by using these sort of compost or manure from your environment, you actually enrich the soil, and the crops that you produce can better yield as compared to maybe others, which at the end of the day will have some other impact. Because some of the evidence has shown that some of the pesticides or inorganic fertilizer that we use actually end up causing more harm to the soil and also to the land. So these are also, some examples that we can talk about. I don't know if my colleagues want to highlight a few.
Thank you very much. He said a whole lot, but I just add that climate smart agriculture has to do with, the fact that we have to innovate. We have to be more scientific. Now, it also has to do with precision agriculture platforms, also attempting to boost farm efficiency and productivity with little environmental impact. So I think with the accurate data, with the early warning systems in our hands, we're able to, create crops, create seedlings that are resistant to the changes in the climate. Okay, I think that's what smart agriculture pivots on.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone within the audience who would want to ask or to contribute to the discussion, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle, and I'm a rapporteur. My question is directed to Dr. Boafo and Dr. Nahila as well. Both of you spoke about the Galamsey issue, and I know maybe you've read some newspapers and some news stories where they talk about children that are being born without genitalia, with 6 fingers, with some deformities when they're born, and with animals as well. I think the most recent one was a lamb being born with 2 heads, 2 legs, a conjoined lamb. And people in the town were saying that it was a spiritual punishment for them destroying the environment. So my question is, in a situation like that, where education isn't so much in towns or villages like that, where they see these implications or effects as spiritual issues, how would you sensitize them to know that, okay, what you're doing to the environment is bad, and that is why this and this and this is happening? Or maybe the mercury you're putting in the rivers due to galamsey is what is causing these birth deformities, instead of it being a spiritual issue. How would you go about that, or educate them on something like that? Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Naila, you want to go?
Thank you very much, Michelle. And that's an interesting observation. I think it came out in some of the interactions that we had, that because of the effects of mercury that is being released as a result of the work that these galamseyers do, there are a lot of health implications, even beyond birth defect. Even it affects people's productivity, and even, I don't want to use the word, I'm told that it has an effect on even the galamseyers themselves. So I don't think there's lack of awareness, that they don't know what they are doing. It's a rational choice thing that people are doing, because, and you saw the way the whole thing has also been I want to say it's a human security issue. People are looking for more interested in what is in it for them, because if you go to communities where there's illegal mining, the people are very much aware of the destruction that they are causing to the environment, and so the effects that they have on them. So maybe to the ordinary villager, if they give birth to a child with a birth defect, they might think it's a spiritual thing. So to what extent are the state agencies also engaging or even educating people, as you rightly pointed out? So I think the sensitization needs to even go beyond trying to get them, because I think now the management of illegal mining in Ghana has become so politicized that it's very difficult to actually deal with it, because the people who are supposed to deal with it are in one way or the other also involved in it. So how do we get even them, the actors, to actually be very frank in the discussion, has been one of the challenges that countries like Ghana are dealing with. So there's sensitization is the way to go, but how do we do it? Because I'm told that in places like Obuasi, and there is galamseyers are very much preferred by, excuse me to say, women, because they have the economic resources to dispense to them. And at the same time, whatever they are doing also has an effect on both the environment and even the people that are living within those communities. So it's a two-way thing that is very dicey to deal with, in the short to medium term process. Thank you very much.
All right. I'll add one or two to that. It's a very good question, Michelle. For us, one of the things that we try to promote is moving from theory to practice. I mean, and we firmly believe that education needs to move from classroom to the community or to areas. And that's what we call the transgressive pedagogies, whereby we need to look at our systems carefully and look at where we can always get students to the communities or to areas to see and contribute to knowledge on the ground. And that's something that I think is important, because we teach students here, and we want them to be able to always understand the issues on the ground. We visited several mining communities, because we have the evidence based on our lab work and all that to tell you that, no, this is not witchcraft, or this is not the girls doing that. It's purely based on that. And so based on our scientific work, we then go back to the communities and have a session with them, have education session with them or interaction with them, sometimes even videos to show, or theater, to show that you don't need to think of this as something coming from anywhere, but based on what is happening here. So I think the whole idea of moving from the classroom to the community through education at different levels is very important, so that we don't have just scholars who know the theories, but at the community level, they don't understand what is happening there. So they need to work together. And that's one point where the idea of citizen science comes in. You know, we work with communities to take data. So we tell people that when you see something in your community, take a picture or let somebody document it, bring it to us, then we can look at it. Then based on that, we can then come to a conclusion of what is really happening. So citizen science is a very important approach to addressing some of these issues.
Yeah, thank you, panelists. I can see there are 2 hands up. So, could we listen to them?
Thank you very much. So thank you all for very interesting and informative presentations. I feel that I have been very educated about the West African context. We live in societies that are quite hierarchical. And so in the last 2 days, yesterday and today, you've heard a lot of government should do this and government should do that and government should do that. I think that one of the weaknesses that we have in our systems is perhaps not enough engagement between government and academia in a way that these lessons and this information is transferred. And what do I mean by that? For instance, if Parliament, any legislature in any of our West African countries, or any responsible organization that was considering steps to take in terms of either policy or in terms of, again, legislation on particular issues, had the opportunity to hear from the academic community as those considerations are being undertaken. In as much as some of them, maybe from a perspective of, well, this is making money, so why is this an issue, might dismiss it. I'm sure that there will be others who will be thinking about it and saying, but this is such a potential risk that we cannot afford to dismiss it. But if we don't find a way, and this is just an example, but if we don't find a way of having that continuous conversation, then what we will see is that we are constantly doing firefighting when crises erupt, instead of doing some of what you have been advocating over here as forward planning to prevent the crises we already have from getting worse. How do you think that forums like this perhaps can be adapted in order to create the opportunity for that kind of civil society, academia, government conversation? Now, I don't know how many people sitting in this hall at the moment are people who are responsible for taking decisions on any of these issues with regard to particular roles and functions. But they should be here because they should have listened to you and they should have had the opportunity to, understanding what you are saying, take that and see how they can translate that into policy and into action. I think that one of the challenges we have is that we have so much information available that we assume that people know what is right and they will do the right thing. Sometimes, even if information is available, people might not know what actually is the right thing. And I want to now, having prefaced my comments with that and asking you this question, I want to refer to something that I have done in my current role in East Africa. I was, of course, this is the UN, so it has a lot of resources. I was given the opportunity to have a climate advisor in my office. And she's a very, very talented, experienced lady who has worked in East Africa for a number of years. And she gave me, if you like, a prognosis of what would be the climate situation in many of the countries of the region in the next 5 to 10 years. And honestly, as she was talking, I could hear the alarm bells ringing in my ears. I was like, you know, this is crazy. And then my response to that was, what do? We went to the regional economic community, which in the Horn of Africa is called IGAD. And we suggested establishing what we called a climate security mechanism. Now, the whole point of having a climate security mechanism is to use the resources available in order to give early warning, what you've been talking about, in terms of what are the projections 5 years ahead, what are the projections 10 years ahead, where are we going to have these drought situations, so that member states can plan to begin to address those issues. We started first by building acceptance for this at the technical level, then we went to the ministerial level, and now we've got it endorsed by the heads of state. So it means that they do see that it is an important issue. But quite honestly, if I did not have someone like her who was able to explain to me the entirety of the dimensions of this problem, it's not anything I would ever have thought about. Because in my background is I'm a lawyer. So in the normal scheme of things, this is not something that would come my way. Let's not assume that educated is informed. And let's also not assume that putting information out there necessarily means people know what to do with it and how to respond to it. I think you have a responsibility to make the knowledge about what will happen if we don't respond much more near and much more urgent, in order that we can see some tangible responses to all the issues that you've raised, which I think are incredibly important. And I want to thank you all for your research and for the work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your always incisive comments and contributions. Thank you really for these comments, very useful. I'm sure the rapporteurs are taking notes, and it will inform the outcome of this panel discussion. I don't know, is there any question, anyone who is willing to ask as we begin to round up our session? Is there any burning question that you would want to ask?
One more question.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Sheila, and I'm with the research department here at the Kofi Annan Peacekeeping and Training Center. So, Prof, in your submission, on your recommendation, you stated we should include reintegration. So I'm wondering, how impactful has this been? And is there any how impactful has this been, and is there any effect in terms of reintegration when it comes to the displacement of people and reintegrating them into a new society?
This is to Dr. Maïga.
D'accord, thank you, Sheila. Alors, pour ce qui est des réintégrations, moi je pense qu'on peut les voir à deux niveaux. La population qui vient, la population qui se déplace vers une communauté, le plus souvent communauté voisine, comment est-ce qu'on peut les réintégrer? Il y a d'abord l'intégration économique, c'est-à-dire à travers surtout les ONG, mais aussi les organisations de la société civile. Parce que si on ne les intègre pas, ils vont rester en marge de la société. Et quand ils restent en marge de la société, cela va créer des problèmes qui vont venir plus tard. Les problèmes vont être, ils peuvent s'exposer à la criminalité, aux gangs, ils peuvent s'exposer au terrorisme, mais aussi il y a des problèmes sanitaires qui peuvent se développer. Mais le fait de les intégrer va amener à résoudre surtout les besoins économiques qu'elles ont, qu'ont ces populations, le premier aspect. L'intégration également peut se trouver au niveau des jeunes qui viennent. Surtout le fait de pouvoir les scolariser. Et les scolariser veut dire que souvent, on peut, même si c'est des enfants qui ne sont pas accompagnés, les trouver des parents d'accueil. Par exemple, on a des projets aujourd'hui qui sont en expérimentation au Mali et au Burkina, par exemple, ou dans les sites de déplacés, on essaie de récupérer des jeunes, on va voir des parents volontaires qui vont recueillir ces jeunes, ces enfants dans leur famille. Mais en contrepartie, des ONG vont leur payer chaque mois un certain montant forfaitaire qu'ils vont payer à ces parents-là qui vont accepter d'accueillir ces enfants-là. Donc ça va faciliter également leur intégration au niveau de la société. Merci.
I think, let me thank Prof for his comment. But there's something we are also not taking into consideration. We have to consistently preempt. You know, it's cheaper for us to preempt than to prevent. So we don't even have to wait for the early warning signs to show. You know, we have to forestall the future. We have to mitigate the future. Now, with regards to issues of integration, I think West Africa, the countries in West Africa, there are good examples of where people migrate into a community and the reintegration process is a very difficult one. It doesn't really work because they come up with indigenship and settlers. It's a major problem. But like I said at the initial stage, it's one important thing that the government should begin to do, and I see it as something that is going to work because it depends on the land use laws, you know, in those countries. Most lands are owned by government. If people are being affected by climate change or environmental challenges, you could relocate them, build houses and put them in there. You know, if we are saying that the countries can't do that alone, then we now look for willing donors who are ready to help. Because I see that it happens. I saw it in China, it happens. They relocated. But one of the major problems is that in relocating these people, sometimes they refuse. They don't want to leave their ancestral land. But you see, if your ancestral land is going to be destroyed, desertification, you can't survive on this land anymore, why can't you relocate? I think these are things we need to begin to forestall the future. I think that's what I think. And reintegration is a big problem, whether we like it or not. For instance, there are people who have moved into other parts of the West African countries, even in my own country. They are still not accepted. Even from within the country, they are still not accepted. So I think we have really identified the government has to be proactive. And Your Excellency, man, you see, sometimes we have these things go to the government, but it depends on those working with the government. It is sometimes prevented from reaching the government. And so, like I suggest, most times we have to keep writing, whether it is columns in the newspapers, in magazines, because at least they read that. And maybe one day, our solutions might be adhered to, they might accept it. So it's a big problem. Our leaders need to be proactive. Our leaders need to be people-oriented. Our leaders need to be development-focused. Our leaders need to preempt the future of Africa. And that cannot be in isolation without simulation. We have to simulate. Like the lady in your office, we have intelligent people here. But sometimes, politics is different. It's about interest. It's about what the leaders like. So it's a huge problem. And, I sometimes, when we discuss issues of Africa, I sometimes feel sorry for us because we know our problem. We can solve our problem. We have the mechanisms to solve our problem, but we are not ready to solve those problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you for your contributions. As we round up this session, there are some key outcomes I'm sure the rapporteurs would have gotten, but from my own side, the key takeaways are: one, for the government within West Africa to invest in smart agricultural practices. Two is to build community resilience to cope with the effects of climate change within West Africa. Third is to enhance disaster management systems through early warning mechanisms to be able to predict future disasters. Four is to encourage tree planting within our communities to stem the effects of desertification. And I think last but not the least is to promote engagement between research institutions, that's the academia, and governments to ensure that policy is informed by the outcome of research. Permit me at this juncture to thank the organizers of this forum for giving me the opportunity to moderate this session. I, at this moment, would want to hand over the responsibility back to the organizers to conclude this session.
Thank you.
I want to also thank the panelists individually and collectively for their inputs, their discussion and contributions to this session. And also want to thank all the delegates for the interesting contributions coming from the floor. So I wish you a good day ahead. And as you go for lunch in Accra, I will say bon appetit and enjoy your lunch. Thank you, and back to the organizers.
Thank you, Doc. We appreciate your time and your wonderful expertise in moderating. So to our speakers, we thank you very much. And on behalf of the Commandant, I have the honor to present to you some tokens, gifts. Ladies first. Prof. To Colonel Dr. and then to Doc. Thank you all so much. We've come to the end of the session. We would converge back here at 2:30 for the final sessions. Thank you very much. Bon appetit. I think we have to take a group photo together, please. The cameraman.